And we're live. Welcome everybody here to the Lakers Lounge. I'm Anthony Irwin, today joined by somebody who, you know what? I'm just going to come out and say it. Jovan Buha is my favorite beat reporter. Dan Wojcicki had that title for a little bit, but has since lost it now that you have made two appearances to his one. So, Dan, apologies, man. You have some work to do, but thank you very much, Jovan, for hopping on during what is a never ending off season. It feels like we're just stuck in August for eternity, basically. How you doing, bud?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
You know, I'm recording this and I have my son sleeping off camera here, so I'm just making sure that that's okay, and we're just gonna get through it. But you wrote a piece for The Athletic where you do tremendous work. In the middle of the off season, you blessed us all with off season content. So thank you very much for that. And it was a fantastic feature, is a fantastic feature that you wrote for The Athletic about Austin Reaves. And it's such a unique story, especially for the Lakers, in that this guy was a complete unknown, then cult hero, then holy shit, he might actually really be good. And then now it's like, wait, where's the ceiling on this guy? And it's even reached the point where people wondered for a little bit if his star search was so insane that he was dating Taylor Swift. So that's where I want to start this. But like, I'm just kind of curious about, from your experience here, this is a pretty unprecedented story. Undrafted player in only 2 seasons playing for now Team USA.
Yeah, it's. I think you put it eloquently when you kind of laid it out with just rewriting his ceiling continually every step of the way. Where going back to high school, this was a guy who only had 3 college scholarships. It wasn't like sometimes there's these undrafted guys that are pedigree guys.
Yeah.
That, just kind of get lost along the way, or maybe they had an injury or something. But with Austin, it was kind of, throughout his entire basketball, adult or, kind of teenage into adult, journey, he's been underrated, overlooked, and just kind of, had to scrap and fight for everything that he's earned. So, to, again, be a high school player who only had 3 college scholarship offers. Then he goes to Wichita State, isn't really, happy with his role and kind of looking at his basketball future. Then he transfers to Oklahoma. And even then, despite, I think if you look at some of his college film showing a lot of the traits that he showed with the Lakers and a lot of the stuff he was doing at the University of Oklahoma, but for whatever reason, that was overlooked again during the draft process, and he wasn't athletic enough. He was too skinny. They weren't sure what position he was. So then has the Detroit opportunity to go number 42, but they were only looking at him with a 2-way. So he decided to bet on himself and decline getting drafted. And they had a whole tiered system, and Lakers were number 2 on that list behind Milwaukee, and ends up signing a 2-way with the Lakers. And then within less than 2 months, shines at the LeBron minicamp, and LeBron and AD are like, this guy has to be on our roster. And Lakers had planned on carrying 14 guys going to the season.
Yeah.
Austin pushed his way to be that 15th. So, and then from there, even the first year and a half, going back to last season, he wasn't even starting. He wasn't a full-time starter until late in the season, basically almost game 70 was when he became a full-time starter. So I think it's kind of comical looking back on it. Of like Lonnie Walker was starting on over him for most of the season. Malik Beasley then after the trade deadline, and now we're talking about this guy as clearly the 3rd best player. I don't think it's a debate. I don't think there's anyone else you can make the case for. But playing on Team USA. He's got a debut sneaker that's sold out in less than 10 minutes. He's got the Taylor Swift dating rumors. He's all across LA on these billboards for Lemon Daddy. which is just a hilarious name, and it kind of fits Austin.
Did you get Austin to say Lemon Daddy? Because that would be just like an incredible soundbite.
I didn't. I wish I did now that you're saying that. But yeah, so I mean, I just think, but throughout this, throughout his career and throughout his journey, he's maintained this chip because that was the thing that was kind of the thesis behind this story of Austin Reaves is a made man. He's had all the success over the last few months. I think for a lot of guys, there'd be a level of satisfaction. Like he's having success right now that, like, if we were ranking guys entering their third year in the NBA right now, he's got to be in the top 5, right? Like, I don't even, off the top of my head, I don't know the ranking, but like, he's in that conversation, and this is for a guy who went undrafted. And to me, to have all that success, like, how do you keep that underdog identity? How do you keep that chip on your shoulder? And that was what I tried to lay out with the feature.
Yeah, I think I saw one of those, NBA something Twitter accounts asking for a redraft of Austin's draft class, and it was like, would he go top 5, top 10? And I'm like, holy shit, that's actually a great question. And he's like, he's way older. He's 25, and it was funny, even in the game when they played against Germany, right? He's playing against Bonga, who obviously a former Laker, and it broke my brain to like Google their ages, and Austin is 25, Bonga is still, I think, 23. And that's also always going to be a factor and something that needs to be taken into account. But even still, like, it's still a meteoric rise, and it's still, like I said, it's really rare. We've been doing this. I've been doing this for about going on a decade now, watching the league closely for a couple decades, I would say. And in my lifetime, there just aren't very many stories like this. Especially when you take into account what you're talking about, where, like, you could say Gilbert Arenas, right? The player for whom that Arenas rule is named, right? And I think he was like a 2nd round pick for the Golden State Warriors out of Arizona. And, even that was kind of a surprise that he dropped that far. And then he immediately gets there and just is this prolific scorer and winds up having a really good career. But even that, he was a pretty good player at Arizona, and he was somewhat disappointing, and that's why he slipped. And here we are, like, now, and he winds up getting the big payday that teams were hoping to use against the Lakers. And we'll talk a little bit about the process of the contract and stuff here in a bit. But yeah, it's just so fascinating to find an unprecedented, unique story. And I thought, again, for The Athletic, you did a great job of telling that. I want to talk about, like, him, the basketball player, because I think that is a big reason why, like, Grant Hill talked about, and he used the term, like, he just has it, right? He just has that thing. And lately, the debate when it comes to Team USA is Jalen Brunson is the starting point guard, and that starting unit isn't quite clicking the way that it kind of needs to. And there's some people asking, maybe should it be Halliburton who starts there? Maybe Ingram goes to the bench and you go Halliburton, Reaves, and Anthony Edwards as your kind of perimeter players there. And, it's wild that Jalen Brunson, a guy who just went and turned around the Knicks, and Brandon Ingram, a former most improved player in his own right, and you're talking about Austin in the same breath as those guys, as somebody who could supplant them in that role. And that's just incredible. And it made me wonder. And the other night on the lowdown, I tried to explain it. And the analogy I used is like if you're building a brick wall, right? You have your actual bricks, that are going to take the brunt of the force against that wall. And then you have your mortar. And most players kind of fall into one of those two categories. You have your stars, who are your bricks, and then you have your role players who allow those stars to fit together. And the thing that I find unique about Austin, though, is that he can actually, depending on lineup, be either brick or mortar. And that is incredibly rare to find.
Yeah, I think I would put myself in the top 1% of Austin believers. Like to me, it was clear early in his rookie season he should be starting. And part of that was because Avery Bradley should not have been starting. But
Yeah.
that's a whole other podcast.
I feel like that was kind of a red flag for Avery Bradley. That like they had that camp and LeBron and AD was like, he is killing Avery Bradley. Can we get this guy on the roster?
Yeah. So I mean, that was like Wayne Ellington and
Yeah.
I mean, Malik obviously had a pretty good season, but so I think going back, like, so that's the context of what I'm about to say. Like, I was surprised at how well he held his own in the Team USA scrimmages. And again, saying this as someone who is an Austin believer, I think he can be an all-star. I think he can be the Lakers' third star. I think he's really, really good. But seeing him going up against Anthony Edwards, because he was playing with the bench unit, so he was defending Anthony Edwards and Brandon Ingram and Mikal Bridges and Jalen Brunson and switching across all four of those positions and holding a zone against those guys. And those guys are all-star, level guys or near all-star level guys. And Austin was not only like, it wasn't just a situation where he was fitting in where you didn't look at him like, oh, this guy shouldn't be on the floor. It was like he was making plays and pulling up for jumpers over guys and creating in the pick and roll and defending guys 94 feet. So just to see that, it really confirmed. And honestly, we see more with the Team USA stuff than we do with the Laker stuff. Like most of the time when we go to Laker practice, we don't see scrimmaging.
It's mostly shooting.
It's free throws, it's threes, it's drill work, but it's not, actual scrimmaging. So to see that, I mean, I'm sure it would look even different in Laker practice where he's cooking, whatever role player he's matched up with. But going up against all-star level guys and really holding his own and being the glue of that second unit alongside Tyrese Haliburton, I think if you look at that starting group, there's just not a lot of above average passing and playmaking. Like I know Ingram can do it and Brunson can do it. But when you look at Bridges, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Anthony Edwards, like I just think overall there isn't that same level of playmaking and creation for others that you've had in with other Team USA starting groups. So that's where I do think there's something to potentially putting Austin or Tyrese in the starting lineup, giving it another ball handler, another guy who can break down people and pick and rolls. Just hit ahead passes, just make things easier for that group. Because really, that is an ISO heavy group of guys who are used to having to create their own shot, and I just think you see that sometimes where they can get stagnant, they can devolve into one-on-one, my turn, your turn basketball, and I think that's where Austin and Tyrese just come in and they change the pace. It's about let's find the best shot, not I need to create something. So I think there's something to that. They probably do need to I think the Brunson thing, it's tricky because he established himself as the leader of the group. And I just think Steve Kerr loves him and he just has too much cachet right now, I think, in that locker room to move him to the bench. So I do think if you're looking at it, it's Ingram or Bridges, but because of Bridges is better off the ball in terms of he just kind of naturally has that 3-and-D skill set. Prior to developing as an on-ball guy in Brooklyn. So I would probably move Ingram to the bench and have him come off and kind of be a scorer with that second group and then put in Tyrese or Austin, depending on how they kind of view the defensive matchups.
Yeah, the Brunson thing is kind of tricky, and it's going to be really interesting. It's one thing, JaVale McGee started for the championship Lakers team, right? Like whoever starts doesn't necessarily matter. But I did find it interesting against Germany that Kerr stuck with Austin, Kerr stuck with Haliburton, and it helped that they were on a 20-something run to get back into the game and eventually pass up Germany to win it. Win it kind of going away too. But yeah, that's going to get kind of awkward, and I can't wait to see how the diplomacy plays out there. Austin himself, though, I forget I forget if I think Pete said it on the show, but I asked him because, when all the rumors started about Austin's free agency and the kind of offers that he might be getting and what the Lakers themselves might offer and stuff like that. I remember Pete, Laker Film Room Pod and the sort, he was on here and I asked him, like, has Austin changed at all? Have you noticed, like, I facetiously said, does he not let people stare him in the eyes now? Like, has he changed? And it was funny. Miran Fader was on the show maybe a couple weeks prior, or maybe a month or so prior, and she had said that Austin is still this like super cheap guy and like would still get the cheapest haircut that he could, and that the money wouldn't really change him, and it is funny to see like that same like aw shucks thing still is the way that he maintains himself off of the court. But the thing that Pete made sure to say is that, like, no, he's a fucking sociopath. Like, he is a killer, and that's the aspect of it that I find really interesting with Austin the person. We could talk about the stuff that he brings to the table as a basketball player, but to have the amount of confidence that he has in his game, given the track that he's been on, is so interesting to me. Where and maybe to a certain extent the path allows it. He's been doubted so long by so many people that he's just like, it is really me against the world. But I do find it interesting, and over the course of last year on a LeBron team, on an Anthony Davis team, there were stretches. There was a game against Utah where he took like 3 straight pull-up jumpers at the free throw line, and he had the confidence to do that with those guys standing there on the court, and those guys had the confidence in him to let him do that, to let him cook like that. So, what, like, from your time watching him, like, what unlocks that? Like, where do you think he derives that confidence from?
That's a good question. I'm honestly not sure. But I think
yeah, it is.
I don't know where it comes from, but
yeah.
I know it's a legit thing, and I think it's the driving force behind all of his success. Because I think if he didn't have that confidence, it would have been so easy to give up at any point along his basketball path. Where again, coming out of high school, you're not really well regarded. Coming out of college, you're not ready for the draft process. Looking at this scene, you don't have many offers beyond several two-way contracts, and even with the Lakers, again, it was a two-way contract initially, and he had to fight his way onto the team. Then even that, I think
he was
with
a 15th
the Lakers,
guy.
He was a 15th guy, and like I think we can, make the argument that like he's kind of been underutilized. I think on the Lakers, like again, I think he should have been starting early in his rookie season and playing more overall. And then I think he definitely should have been starting. When I was projecting out the starting lineups for his second year, I had him in that starting group and thought he should have been starting the entire time. So to see him also kind of battle with, like, even when he's showing out and playing well, whether it's politics or just, kind of being pigeonholed in a certain role, where I think the Lakers have liked him as like that spark off the bench, that energy guy, but like he's just so much more than that. So he's overcome a lot, and again, even with the Team USA stuff, like I saw it in my mentions when I would talk about it on Twitter or wrote about it. Like, people are saying, why is this guy on Team USA? They're wasting a roster spot. Like, Trae Young should be on the team over him, whatever. And he showed, like, I mean, you can make a case, like, if you're making the best 12 players on Team USA, maybe he's not on that group. But with this group and the guys that were actually available and that they were looking at, like, he's clearly, he's in the top 7 or 8 with this group, which is kind of crazy when you look at how many, again, all-star, young pedigree guys they have. You would think Austin's lower on that totem pole. But so to me, I think the confidence drives everything. And again, talking to him about how he views things and his chip on his shoulder, like, the first thing he brings up is like, I'm still pissed about not making the Rising Stars challenge back in February. Like, that's driving me right now of like, how did you guys think I shouldn't be on that team?
Yeah.
And it's just little things like that. Like he's got, as cliche as it can sound, like he's got the Mamba mentality of like he remembers every little slight. He's always looking for fuel. Maybe the Jordan meme is, I took that personally. Like that's
Yeah.
Austin. He's looking for that, and it's everywhere still. Again, there's like even with my story yesterday, there are people that are like overrated. He's a Laker. Da da da. Like it's just he kind of, and he sees that. He talked about seeing some of that stuff on social media, and like that stuff's all fueling him.
Yeah. That's where it gets tough because like good white players do get somewhat overhyped, right? And the Lakers have such an insane, huge, and loud fan base that, yeah, you are going to hear more about them. And these accounts that exist to get engagement know that if you tweet about the Laker on Team USA, Lakers fans are going to get behind it and retweet it and all that stuff. And, mathematically speaking, there is some of that going on. But also, he is that good. Like that's the crazy thing is that like you do see him go out there and the basketball that Team USA was playing just looked better. And I'm not saying that it's just because of him. He played a lot with Tyrese Halliburton. I think Halliburton is. I just think he's a better player than Jalen Brunson personally. And so like it helps that you're playing with the better point guard and the more connective point guard and Austin's game, I think because of the way that he can shoot and his quicker release, which has been really cool to see, is his release is a lot faster on Team USA than we saw it last year. And it's still going in. I think 57% from three so far in these exhibition games. After tweaking his release is nuts. And yeah, there are other factors, but he is still that good. He is still, that player and that talented. I'm curious where you see his ceiling though. Like he is 25, so like projecting him out isn't quite the same as it would be if he was, 22 or 23. I've had people close to him say that they see him as a potential like top 25 player. Darvin Ham has said that he sees him potentially making an all-star, which would make him a top 30 player. Where do you see this going?
I could see all-star top 30 guy. I think to your point, like he's probably got 2 to 3 years until he's in his prime. But again, I think if you look at how much he's grown, not only season over season, but within seasons, like I think that's kind of been the crazy thing with him is it's like there are times with Austin where it almost feels like that, the scenes from the Spider-Man movies where he just gets his powers and he's kind of like figuring them out. Like he's kind of got some of that where it's like every game, every rep, every second he's out there, he's kind of like absorbing things and observing and learning and really adapting and kind of like learning on the fly. And I think it's almost like the more knowledge he has, just the more powerful he is because he's so smart and because he plays the game, I think through such an intellectual level. But so I would say I wouldn't like I could buy the all-star hype. I think it would probably be more of a scenario where maybe like 3 years from now where like if LeBron's still on the team, but it's more of like he's playing 24, 26 minutes a night, that they're kind of load managing him or just reducing his workload, and Austin really has to be that number 2 option probably on a nightly basis, at least in the regular season. And then you kind of see him get 21 to 24 points a night, 6, 7 assists, 4 or 5 rebounds, really good shooting percentages, and obviously, plus defender. So that to me is probably the path to him making an all-star team. But it's tough to, because again, there's still this cognitive dissonance of like top 30, and you think about some of the guys you think about like a Pascal Siakam or like a Bradley Beal and like some of these names that are like borderline or just inside the top 30, and putting Austin in that class, it still feels premature right now. But the guy we saw at the end of the regular season and in the playoffs, he wasn't top 30, but he was a
On
legit
his way
like
there.
high level starter, you know, on that trajectory. So I want to see what he looks like next year. I'm also interested to see how Darvin frames things, because Darvin
just
was
gonna ask
very
this.
adamant about the whole like, oh, you know, behind LeBron and AD, it could be anyone's night. It could be Austin, D'Lo, Rui, Dennis, and Austin really distanced himself from that group. I think again, it's clear that he was the Lakers' top priority in the offseason. He's their third best player, and I mean, Darvin kind of doubled down on that, assertion with his comments about Austin being an all-star. But Darvin has always, he's a player-friendly coach. He is always hyping his guys up in the media, and he has this tendency where even if you ask him about a player in particular, he will find, like, if you ask him about Austin, he'll compliment Austin, and then he'll throw in like, well, and D'Lo, does a lot of the same things, and like Gabe Vincent too, and like he's one of those guys who like it's almost like he's conscious of how much he's praising someone, so then he'll have to try and like even out the praise and not play favorites.
But like molded in Twitter, where like you give a compliment to anybody and it's a slight to somebody else.
Exactly. But I'm interested to see, like, come media day, are they really hyping up Austin as like the number 3 guy, or is it still like, well, we got D'Lo, who's a former All-Star, and like we're paying Rui more money than Austin technically, and like Rui's a big part of what, like, I'm just interested how they kind of frame it. To me, I would lean into the big 3 narrative and say Austin's kind of your young star on the rise that we're confident could be a big 3 with LeBron and AD, but I don't know how they're going to play that.
I think this is the first year where they aren't doing it's completely positionless, right? The All-Star vote. So I'm really kind of curious where his votes come out for the All-Star game. But yeah, do you see him as it doesn't necessarily have to be this rigid, but do you see him, he sees himself in your piece as a point guard. He wants to get back to playing more point guard and stuff like that. I, heading into this offseason, was hoping that the Lakers would treat him as the point guard, the starting point guard next year, and try to, ironically, the perfect player to put next to him is KCP. But like if he sees himself as a point guard, and like you talked about, Darvin is a very egalitarian coach. I would like to see Austin as your starting point. Maybe you play D'Lo as like your tertiary option out there, and then Vincent manages the second unit. But do you see Austin as a point guard?
Yeah. And as you said, that's the position he grew up playing. That is the position he's most comfortable playing. I think we've seen, for as good as he can be off the ball, a lot of the highlights and sort of the success he's had has been him having the ball more. I think a big part of that was getting rid of Russell Westbrook and creating, opening up some of that usage and some of that ball handling and playmaking opportunities for Austin. Just because looking at the guys they brought in, it wasn't going to be Vando, Rui, or Malik. D'Lo obviously can do some of that stuff, but I think Austin does it at a higher level. I think really when we look back, I think with some distance from the Lakers, trade deadline and the success they had in the second half of the year, I think the biggest thing was Austin and his growth. And yes, there was an addition by subtraction element of getting rid of Russ and adding complementary role players and adding depth, but all those guys had their moments, especially in the regular season, and some of it carried into the playoffs. But all those guys also fell out.
Moment.
What?
I was gonna say, I think Malik had like a moment
at the New Orleans game,
and then it was just like,
but but all those guys also, like, I mean, Vando got played off the court kind of in every series. D'Lo, obviously the Denver series, but to me was more up and down in the first 2 series than people seem to remember. I think there's this notion that like he was great the first 2 rounds and he really struggled in the conference finals, but like don't forget the first 2 rounds. I'm like, if you actually go back, like, and some of those games where he had double figure scoring, it was like one of them was I think game 5 in Golden State where Lakers get slaughtered, and I think he had like 7 points going in the fourth quarter. He scores 8 in a fourth. They're down 30 in the fourth. He scores 8, and he finishes with 15. So you can look at that and be like, yeah, look, he had 15 in this game, but like the context of it actually was he was not good the first 3 quarters. No one on the Lakers really was, but that was a game where like I would actually put that as like a minus D'Lo game rather than someone might look at the box score and be like, oh, 15.
And he had like another game too where he was pretty bad, and then he hit like 3 threes, and that's what everybody kind of remembers, rather than like the bad stretch, because like D'Lo's that kind of player. He's a very loud one way or the other player, right? He's really loud bad, and he's really loud good.
And then with Rui, like I think people kind of forget, Rui was not playing that well, really in the regular season. Kind of like entering the playoffs, Rui was a wild card of like he had some good games, but remember he had that DNP CD late in March against the Bulls where Darvin had to kind of send him a message of like, you gotta stop just looking for your shot, you gotta play within the system, you gotta embrace the role player things that we're asking you to do. So even a guy like Rui, I think was huge in the playoffs, but up until that point hadn't probably had the regular season contribution that guys like Vando and D'Lo and Malik had. So really, when we look back at it, like what was the biggest thing? Austin went nuclear basically from mid-February on of him stepping into a higher usage role, playing with the ball more in his hands, and just being the third guy that he became over that second half. So I think he's a point guard. I have a weird like fantasy lineup where I think it would be really cool. Like I could see at some point the Lakers' best lineup being AD, LeBron, Rui, Max Christie, and Austin Reaves. And
all right, you're on the right show for that.
now you got size across all 5 positions. Austin's big for a point guard. You could switch across not 1 through 5, but like at least 1 through 4. Those guys can all like Max and Austin could play up. Max has got good size and athleticism, and Austin has shown he can battle bigger guys. So, like, I just love that lineup on both ends. You got LeBron and Austin running the offense. AD is a screener, and then Max. And then Rui, we'll see if his 3-point percentage carries over from the play. It's not going to carry over 48%, but, like, can he be 35, 36% reliably?
Yeah.
We'll see. But I actually think, like, Max kind of taking that KCP type role of the big off guard, can defend multiple positions, knock down open threes, get out in transition. Like I think Max can do that, and that to me is a lineup where like that could potentially be their closing lineup at some point. And hey, why not make that their starting lineup depending on again how Max and Rui develop.
Yeah, I am right there with you on Max. I think if that happened early, it would be because D'Lo just wasn't very good, and Vincent is more of the player he was in the regular season than he was in the postseason. But I've been saying all summer, so much so at Summer League, the people were like asking if I was okay about how much I wanted to talk about Max Christie. So. Last thing before we get you out of here, and completely segueing away from, and I want to be clear, I hope everybody does check out your piece for The Athletic on Austin Reaves. It's fantastic. I'll put it in the show notes as well. We're still waiting for the Lakers to fill out their 14th roster spot, and I think you were I saw you mentioned that. Christian Wood has an eye on what's going on in Miami with who is involved in the trade there and all of that stuff. I haven't checked in a little bit, but last I heard, the Lakers were still focused on Wood as their first priority, and then from there it goes like Biyombo, and then we'll see. But I know they do still want a center. Have you heard anything there on Wood? And if it is Wood, like how would you feel about Wood as the addition versus some of the other options out there on the market?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been pretty silent, pretty just status quo with the big man situation. Like, from my understanding, Wood is in the mix for Miami, so he's waiting out that situation. He's the Lakers' top priority. Biombo's number 2. I almost said Bamba. Biombo's number 2.
Yeah.
And I think
Bamba's like, wait, really?
I could have stayed. So if Wood goes to Miami, or potentially there's an opening elsewhere, if that's a 3-team trade, a 4-team trade, musical chairs kind of with the front court situation. If he goes elsewhere, I think they just kind of immediately sign Biyombo. And then from my understanding, JaVale, I think he hasn't really been a rotation guy for a couple of years. So I think had he shown a little bit more, there would potentially be interest in a reunion and kind of running it back, similar to running it back with Dwight. And, they had some success with that. Even with the third stint, I thought Dwight had some pretty good performances in games on his last legs.
Like once a week, he was fine.
Yeah. But JaVale, I think that would be option number 3 behind Biyombo and Wood. So I don't foresee a JaVale reunion until those two guys are off the market. So I think it's really going to be like at some point the Lakers have to make a decision of, are we going to wait this Wood situation out into the regular season? Wood has to make a decision of
he needs
if
to get
Dame
signed
isn't
somewhere.
traded by opening day of training camp. Like, am I really just going to not get paid and just be on the market? So we got 5 weeks until media day. So I think there's going to be some resolution within the next 5 weeks. I would probably bet, barring a Dame trade happening out of the blue within the next 2 or 3 weeks, I would probably bet on it happening week 4, week 5, like kind of those 2 weeks leading into training camp is when I think the Lakers, if they're kind of done waiting on Christian Wood, they just say, okay, let's sign Bismack.
Yeah.
So I think it's still those two guys. I know Laker fans are impatient and are tired of waiting. Well, they're tired of waiting. It's been it's been the same 2 names for a month and a half now, right? Like or month, whatever. But yeah, so that's my understanding of it. Now, as far as the fit, I admittedly I'm not the biggest Wood guy. That'll
be the clip for the show.
I set myself up with that one. I think just hearing some of the things behind the scenes and then the defense, I thought Cranjis had a really good breakdown of him on his podcast, Lakers Exceptional Podcast, about his defense and it being better than people think. But I still think in comparison with Biyombo, there is a gap there. And I also think, as I wrote a story a few weeks ago about how the Lakers' 2 big lineup fantasy just doesn't make sense to me. And if you look at AD is a 5 and LeBron is a 4, that is different. That like in 2020, AD was still probably more of a 5, but you could say like 4.5. AD is a 5 in 2023, and LeBron is probably more of a 4.5 than even a 4 in 2023. So like, I just think the notion of sliding those guys down in the lineup, kind of putting more pressure on those guys to defend on the perimeter, I think is a losing formula. And especially when those guys aren't shooting the ball. Like that's a whole other conversation of like, it's one thing if you're telling me AD is shooting like 2020, which we've now had 3 seasons since then, which he has not shot that way, then sure, you can sell me on another big in the lineup. But I think it can work against second units. I think it can work in spurts. But if you're saying the foundation of the Lakers rotation is another big man starting next to AD and those lineups playing 15 to 24 minutes a night, I don't think that makes any sense in 2023. To me, the argument for Christian Wood is he has more upside. He's more skilled. He's more talented. All those descriptors, and I think he could withstand the AD. Like when AD's injured, he can step in, play 25, 30 minutes, and help you. Kind of in that very similar to Thomas Bryant, but probably even higher upside.
Better Thomas Bryant.
He's a better Thomas Bryant. Mm-hmm. But remember, with AD was healthy, Thomas Bryant wasn't happy with his role. And there were some nights he was playing 8, 10, 12 minutes. And that partnership never really worked together. Worked together on either end. So I guess for me, I would go Biyombo. I think he gives them a little bit more of what they need. He's a more reliable option. I think they just need a guy who can finish inside, block shots, rebound, hold down the fort for 10 to 15 minutes when AD's off the floor. That to me is Biyombo, not Christian Wood. But I understand. I mean, Christian Wood is their number one guy, and I understand the appeal of him on a minimum contract. But I'm somewhat skeptical.
He's also available for a minimum contract for a
reason. Also available, but talking to people in his previous stops, talking to people who covered him in his previous stops, I think there's a reason why he's on a minimum contract.
Yeah.
Despite putting up big numbers in various places. And I think we just had a situation with Russell Westbrook, or the Lakers had a situation with Russell Westbrook where they were trying to fit a square into a round hole.
Square peg into a round hole.
Square peg into a round hole. And,
more wood talk.
Russ was better than some of the point guard options out there, but it just wasn't a great fit, and he never bought into his role. And with Christian Wood, if he buys in, yes, that's the highest upside possibility. But we've also seen certain guys just struggle to do that, and I don't know if he's in the position where he's desperate enough to fully buy in, but we'll see.
The other aspect of it that is a factor to your last point about what happens if he doesn't buy in. The Lakers are hard capped, and they aren't going to be able to just cycle through other options if that doesn't work out. So, whoever they do bring in on that 14th roster spot, if you have to use the 15th roster spot to make up for that being a mistake or not necessarily working out, that does complicate things. I am personally still, pulling for the Lakers to wind up with Christian Wood. I think there's still a bit of a talent deficiency there, especially at the center spot. I would feel better about that spot if they had a better player than Jackson Hayes as the backup player right now. But also the part of it, the part of the Biyombo thing that I like, the Lakers the last couple seasons haven't had a player who stepped in and was the muscle out there on the court, was usable muscle that could be, they missed the Markieff Morris. They missed the Boogie Cousins. They missed the Dwight, where if I remember there was a game, I forget who the opponent was, but somebody fouled LeBron really hard. And I noticed nobody did a thing. And in a playoff game, if somebody fouls your absolute best player, and maybe this is me just being an old curmudgeon or whatever, but historically, if somebody fouls the best player on the other team a little bit too hard, it's on somebody to step up.
If someone
take
hits
a
Steph
similar
Curry,
foul.
Draymond is stepping in.
Exactly. Thank you. Yeah. And we saw it all the time, with Kurt Rambis was I'm reading the Showtime book and watching the Winning Time show, right? Kurt Rambis was that back in the day. And then eventually it was Horace Grant on the three-peat Lakers the year that he was there. And, we talked about Dwight and the role that he played there. The Lakers just haven't had somebody out there who can step in and commit a hard foul, an extra hard foul, to say no, you don't get to hit LeBron, AD, or even Reeves, to bring this conversation full circle. So Wood isn't that player. Biyombo, that's the thing that he brings that it most intrigues me, is that he's a little bit more reliable, higher baseline player, and also brings this piece to the puzzle that the Lakers just haven't had in a couple of years.
Well, you bring up a good point that I was kind of trying to make, but I think you made it better, where I think, to me, Jackson Hayes and Christian Wood are kind of two, I don't want to say two sides of the same coin, because I think Wood is a lot more established and has proven that he's at least a rotation guy. But to me, they're more upside guys, where, again, I think Wood would have a relatively limited role. So he would have to find a way to thrive in that, 18 to 24 minutes a night, most likely coming off the bench, but who knows, maybe they acquiesce to him and start him and do the too big thing. But I think having two guys who are potentially unreliable as your backup options, like the Lakers have kind of had that, as you've alluded to, with like, Thomas Bryant is obviously bounced around. Damian Jones, DeAndre Jordan was on his last legs, but somehow has continued to extend his career.
Yeah, the most likable player in the history of the league.
So I think for me, I would have maybe preferred in hindsight's 2020, but like a Christian Wood, Bismack Biyombo center pairing off the bench, and maybe no Jackson Hayes, and that you kind of have like the upside guy and the reliable guy, and then it's like you can go different looks. Like Wood could play next to AD in certain lineups. Biyombo gives you that muscle off the bench and the rim protection. Like I think people don't realize how good of a rim protector he was. Like last year, second in defensive field goal percentage allowed at the rim behind Triple J. That's the defensive player of the year. So not saying he's Triple J, but just to have that guy for 10, 12, 15 minutes as a bench rim protector, the Lakers haven't had a reliable bench rim protector really since
Dwight.
Since probably the championship year Dwight, like kind of the second or the third stint Dwight, but really the championship year Dwight. And I think to have that role would be invaluable. And just like, I'm also kind of open to, do you just sign Wood and Biyombo? And I know they don't want to do that. I know they want to have that open roster spot and whatever, but to me, like Jackson Hayes has not proven that he is a night to night guy. There's a chance he's not, and sure, take the upside swing. But I think to go into the season being like, we're going to rely on Wood and Jackson Hayes, there's a scenario in which the upside hits and Jackson Hayes is locked in. He develops on all his talent and upside. Wood buys into his role, et cetera, et cetera. There's also a scenario where Jackson Hayes is the same guy he's been in New Orleans, which at some parts last season was their third or fourth string center. And Christian Wood is the guy that has bounced around the league and people have kind of continually given up on. And now you're back to the same scenario of like 80s are only playable big. And the other guy we haven't mentioned is Colin Castleton. I think he's going to have a legit shot to make the roster. I think that if the Wood and Biyombo situations drag out, if those two guys go elsewhere, Colin Castleton will have a legit shot. I think they're going to have the mini camp again. He could pull an Austin Reaves, same agents. We'll see if he can play his way onto
that
the
agent.
roster,
By the way, they did the same thing with Castleton as they did with Reaves, where they put together that list of teams and they have an analytics department there at AMR, and they threw together a collection of teams, and the Lakers were at the top of the list for Castleton in terms of reliable possibility that he could crack that roster. It's funny. Nobody's going to sit here and shed a tear over Jackson Hayes getting signed to a minimum contract. But a lot of like where the Lakers find themselves right now makes a lot more sense without Hayes on the roster, right? Because if you don't have Hayes on the roster, you could go out and get both Biyombo and Wood, or you could bring in Wood and also convert Castleton's contract in the same way you did Reaves. But so long as Hayes is on the roster, it makes it kind of tough because you're hard capped, and just cutting somebody before the season even starts just doesn't make very much sense. I just don't think they ever thought there was a world in which Wood or Biyombo would be available for the minimum.
I mean, we're really getting to the weeds here, but I think that's kind of how I view both Reddish and Hayes.
Yeah.
I think that those are, I would have preferred one of the two and probably not both. But because to me, there's a chance that both guys, I mean, at least based on what they've shown in the NBA, there's a chance that both guys just aren't rotation guys. And now you only have 14 guys on the roster because you want to keep one spot open. And two of these guys are not, because we also have to remember, like, not only have they not really been reliable rotation guys in general, but they haven't played in playoff games and big moments.
Yeah.
And so there's a jump to go from like lottery team, barely rotation player to rotation player on like a playoff team to then rotation player on a contender. And like, to be clear, the Lakers don't need them to be rotation players ultimately. Like, I think they have the depth and the flexibility and versatility to use the rest of the rotation. When I did my rotation projection, like I had Hayes as the 10th guy, and Cam Reddish outside the rotation altogether.
Yep,
But
same.
if you're looking at 14, we're only committing to 14 guys, and now 2 of these guys might not be able to play. All of a sudden, you're down to 12, and AD goes down, LeBron goes down, whoever goes down. Now all of a sudden, you got 11 playable guys, and like I just think they're gambling on at least one of those 2 guys hitting, if not both. And I'm a little skeptical based on what we've seen from both in throughout their short careers so far.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even more so, like to be clear, like Malik Monk had shown way more in Charlotte than either Jackson Hayes or Cam Reddish. Even Lonnie Walker, I think, like he was starting for parts in San Antonio. Like for as much as those guys were projects or gambles, like this is more of like a Stanley Johnson level to me of like,
yeah.
And Stanley did have some productive moments for the Lakers, but ultimately
On a bad team.
It was a bad team, and we've seen since then he struggled to stay in the league. But
yeah,
I would say like even the people kind of trying to compare this to Malik or Lonnie, I think those 2 guys are just flat out better, and that has since been proven with them. I mean Lonnie got a minimum deal, but like I think he'll play a solid role for the Nets. Malik was in the 6th Man of the Year running for Sacramento. Like those 2 guys were just better, I think, in general than these 2, but they'd also shown more. I think if you go back and look at Charlotte, if you go back and look at San Antonio, Lonnie and Malik had moments. They had productive stretches. There were just some other questions with them. Jackson Hayes and Cam Reddish, I don't think have shown anywhere near to the same potential, at least on an NBA floor, that those 2 guys had previously shown.
Yeah, if Hayes leaves the Lakers, I'm not concerned that he's going to go out and be some impact player for some other team. But when Monk was no longer a Laker, when Monk signed with the Kings, I was like, oh, that's a fun fit there. I thought that now, and even I, being high on Monk, I didn't think that he would be what he was for Sacramento. So, we'll see with both of those guys, and we'll see where things go here for the Lakers. But Jovan, thank you very much for hopping on. Again, you can find all of his work at The Athletic. You can follow him on Twitter, or I'm not going to say the other name for it. You could also find him on TikTok under the same @ as well. And also keep an eye out for the Stargazing Pod as well. So we will talk to you soon, Jovan. Thank you very much for hopping on, and keep on holding over Dan's head that you are my favorite beat reporter.
I will. Thanks, man.